silicone molds for my coasters. Now, I know a lot of other YouTubers have done similar videos about how to make silicone molds, but I actually had this specifically requested a couple times because a lot of the other videos show how to make silicone molds for other shapes. Mine are going to be these coasters. Now, a lot of people do make and sell molds for coasters, but a lot of them have flat edges like this. You can see it's a totally flat edge. Mine have jagged edges that sort of resemble rock. So a lot of the time, if you do find molds for Agate style coasters, they don't have these kind of edges. So that's why I think people were requesting that I show them how I make my molds. So what I did is I started off by making my molds using silicone caulking like this. And that did the trick, but I was having to cut the edges with scissors and it was giving me tons of blisters and was a bit of a pain. So I decided to change up my method and create my own molds that look like this, which look a little more professional. They definitely last longer, and I do still cut my edges a little bit just to sort of touch them up, but much less than I used to have to. So that's what I'll be showing you today. So the key is that you do have to have your coasters already made first in order to make a mold, because you're going to be making the mold out of your coasters. So what I did when I first made them is I created coasters with this mold. I cut the edges exactly how I wanted them, and then I created my bigger mold. Okay, so first thing you'll need: mixing container, mixing stick. You will want a scale because a measuring cup will not measure accurately enough, so you'll want a kitchen scale, digital kitchen scale. You will want a container to pour your silicone with, and what you're going to be doing is pouring your mixed silicone into the top of this and letting it trickle out the bottom to prevent bubbles. Now I just used a solo cup and cut a little hole in the bottom. You are going to need coasters that have already been made. Here are mine. They don't have to be painted on the edges. Actually, it's probably better if they're not, but this is all I had. You're going to want to make sure that the bottom is totally smooth. I made the mistake of using a bottom that was scratched, and those scratch marks got transferred to my mold. The mold, the silicone, will pick up every little detail. And then on the flip side, you're going to want to make sure the top is completely flat, because you're going to want it to sit like this, and you're going to be pouring your mold over it. So you want to make sure the top is totally flat and the bottom is perfectly smooth. So I'm going to use 6 because I'm making a mold of 6. Then you're going to need the container, the walls and the base for where you're going to make your molds. Now you can use pretty much any material except for silicone, because the only thing that silicone will always stick to is silicone. I would suggest plastic if possible. Here I'm using a plastic board. It's sort of like a foam board as the base, and you're going to want to make sure that base is perfectly smooth and flat. And then as the walls, I'm using a sort of metal because that's what I had laying around my house. But you can also use something like this, and you can just cut off the top so that this part will be your walls, and you'll just want to tape or super glue this part to the bottom like so, and then you would be pouring your silicone molds into here. Same thing with a Tupperware container, a plastic Tupperware container. You can cut the top off and use the sides as the walls. Up to you. I got creative with the metal. But you're going to want to make sure that you either super glue or tape the walls down to the base. I use super glue. I feel like it works the best to prevent leakage. I feel like leakage can still happen with tape. And then when you want to take the mold out, you just rip the walls or cut. Okay, so that's what you'll need. And let's get started with actually making our molds. All right, let's get started then. So first steps first. I already have my walls and my base made. You'll have to make that for yourself first. Hopefully that's pretty straightforward, but if not, feel free to comment and I'll answer your questions. So now I have my 6 coasters that I'm going to lay down in my molds. Some people tape them down. I tried to do that last time and the tape caused silicone to seep underneath because it sort of raised the coaster off the base. So I'm just gonna rest my coasters in the bottom today. One thing to note, you're gonna wanna make sure that the top part is on the bottom, or whichever side you want to be the top of your mold should be touching the base. Okay, so they're in here, nice and flat, nice and smooth. Now we're going to be measuring. Now, every silicone is different. My silicone is Mold Max 30, and it's 100 parts of part A to 10 parts of part B. Now, I think it's best if you use a rubber, or not a rubber, plastic mixing container, like a bucket. Unfortunately, I just didn't have one big enough, so I'm gonna try this tin. Okay, so zero this out. And I've calculated the amount I need by measuring length times width times height of my mold, basically. And I've determined that I'm going to need 2,300 grams of this to 230 grams of this. Here goes. Okay, so now you're going to want to mix this really well. My colors, my part A color is white and my part B color is very, very bright pinky red. So you'll be able to see once they mix together, it'll become more of a bubblegum pink color. But just like resin, you're gonna wanna mix it really well and make sure to scrape the sides and just make sure it's really well mixed. So if possible, you're gonna wanna make sure that your container isn't too full, because that makes it way harder to stir. Mine's a little bit full, but I still have a little bit of room to work with, which is good. I would also suggest wearing gloves if possible, but you'll have to wear vinyl gloves because latex can interact with the silicone and cause a bad reaction or something. So you have to use vinyl gloves if you do, but that was definitely a bit of a pain to get all that sticky, slimy silicone all over my fingers. Okay, so I'll speed this up and I'll come back when we're pouring. Okay, so I'm done mixing, all ready to go. So now I'm going to be pouring my mixture into this cup so that I can slowly trickle out. Now you're gonna wanna pour it into the lowest point, so that means you don't want it to be trickling on top of your coaster. You want it to be trickling onto the base, and then it will slowly climb over top of the coasters. All right, so let's go. So we're still going over here. It's a bit of a lengthy process, but I think it's worth it to make sure you don't ruin your mold with a bunch of bubbles. As you can see, I have a little bit of a leak here, but I'll put some tape on that as soon as I can, once this is empty. One more thing I wanted to mention, you have to make sure that you pour and cure your silicone at room temperature. You can check the instructions of your silicone just to make sure, but I'm pretty sure all silicones are the same way. So basically you just don't want to be leaving your new mold to cure in your unheated garage in the winter or anything. Okay, we're just about done here. The mold is done, essentially. There's one thing I can warn you guys against. It's make sure you don't have a leak, because that was a big pain. And I don't even know if I stopped it. I tried to use hot glue to stop it because I didn't think tape would work. And I don't know, it looks like it's stopped, but I can't really tell. So hopefully, because I'd hate for all of this silicone to leak out onto the floor. Anyways, I will now let this cure for 24 hours and then I'll come back and I'll show you guys the finished product. Alright guys, this has been curing for over 24 hours, so we're gonna see how it looks. So I'm gonna cut the edges here, pull this back. I fixed my leak over here, it looks like. Okay, this is looking pretty good. Okay, so as you can see, you probably don't want to use coasters that you're gonna sell because they're gonna have some silicone on them. It might be okay. The silicone's peeling off, but it might not always, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so most of them are gonna peel out, but there's ones like this one that might not. If they don't, you're gonna want to use a knife or an X-Acto knife to cut around the edges. I might be able to peel it out though. Let's see. Yes, it came out. Look at that. Okay, and there you go, guys. A beautiful silicone mold. I'm really proud of this one. It actually looks amazing and has like barely any bubbles in it. My last one had some bubbles, so I'm so excited to use it. Thanks for watching, you guys. If you have any questions at all, feel free to send me a message or comment below. Thanks, guys.